Hey everyone, welcome. So good to be with you today. I am Dr. Pavini Moray. I am the founder of Wellcelium. And if you haven't been to one of our webinars, I just want to issue you a really warm welcome. This is a kind of an intense one to come into, right? So Wellcelium is a queer and trans-led learning community online, and we teach adults who long for healthy connection, the skills to have it, the skills that you really need to be able to love yourself and be in good connection with others. And on the first Thursday of every month, we offer a free teaching on relevant topics. And so today's topic is overcoming shame and the importance of your erotic confidence. So just a few housekeeping things. There will be time for a live Q&A at the end of our hour today, so stick around for that. This is a participatory teaching. I'm here live, you're there live, and I want you to engage. I want you to really walk away with some practical things that you can use in your quest for erotic confidence today. So there will be moments where I ask you to drop an answer into the chat, and it really is helpful if you do, so please do that. And go ahead and turn off all your other devices. Give yourself the gift of this time of uninterrupted, focused, concentrated time. It's special to do this. Towards the end of our time together, I'll be talking about our upcoming erotic confidence course. There's a special offer for you because you're coming to this webinar. And I just want to start by saying thanks for showing up for this, really. You know, shame is not most people's favorite topic, right? We tend to avoid talking about it and thinking about it. And so the courage that you're exhibiting right now, just by being here, just by watching this, take a moment and just congratulate yourself for that, because it's kind of a big deal. Great. So there is a very high possibility that everyone here today, me included, has some degree of shame around sexuality and about where you are in your sexual expression. And there are really good reasons for that. It didn't come from nowhere. It's a cultural phenomenon. So let's talk a little bit about what shame is, and then we'll be getting into some tools to interrupt and bust it so that you can live a more shameless life. So the working definition that I use comes from Dr. Brene Brown, that shame is an intense, painful feeling, an experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Belonging being a really important word here. So shame is really a miasma. It's invisible. You cannot see it. It's very difficult to perceive. And it wafts around and really inhibits and prohibits a lot of confidence and sexual expression. It really inhibits your freedom. So it comes from, we're not going to shame ourselves about our shame in this teaching, right? So it comes from a protective impulse. It's a good strategy gone sideways, and I'll be talking a little bit more about why. But that particular signature of shame, while it varies individual to individual, at its core, it's really a somatic mechanism. It's something that happens in the body to try and take care of something. And what it's trying to take care of, in my opinion, is that true bottom of the barrel feeling, which is powerlessness, groundlessness, right? That's the thing that is really terrible to feel. And so shame, what it does is it tells you that you're the problem, that you're responsible, right? And so the main way that shame keeps you from experiencing powerlessness is by having you take responsibility for the situation, right? It prevents you from being a victim in the situation, and it makes it your fault. And if it's your fault, then you weren't powerless, right? You had control. You could have done something different, right? So I'm going to ask you to type something in the chat. If there was one thing in your life that you refused to be ashamed about anymore, what would be transformed in your life? What would be different if you refused to be ashamed about that XYZ shameful thing? And go ahead and type that into the chat. So what would be transformed? Great. Saying no, approaching people you're attracted to. What else? What else would be transformed? Quitting something that's no longer working. Great. Forgiveness, autonomy. Beautiful. Anything else? Okay. The trauma, yeah. The past, acceptance, all of these things get transformed when we stop being ashamed, right? There are three things that shame needs in order to persist and actually expand in your life, right? So those three things are secrecy, silence, and judgment. So I'm going to touch on each of these. So in terms of secrecy, this is where shame really thrives. It hates to be seen. It likes to operate at the edges, under the consciousness, in the shadowy, dark, dusty corners, right? When it's witnessed, when shame is witnessed, it's often it just deflates. It just it stops taking up so much space. So it really cannot exist in the light of love and acceptance. So it really needs secrecy. And if there are secrets that you are keeping, often it's because there's shame at work. And I want to just tease apart secrecy and privacy, because they are very different, actually. Privacy are the things that you want to keep close to you, right? That there's some reason that that's important to not share it with others, to not distill it. You want to play your cards close to your chest about this thing, right? Secrets, on the other hand, are the things that you dare not tell because something bad will happen. And maybe that something bad is defined and maybe it's not, right? Maybe it's just kind of like this fear of something bad will happen if I tell. So secrecy is where shame just really roots in, and we don't want to tell people these things about us. We don't want to share these things. They're secrets. Silence is a piece of this, right? That we're not talking about it. Shame can really only continue when it's unhindered, right? So if we talk about it, we're hindering shame. We're putting an obstacle in its path, right? Those unspoken things that we're not saying are the silent things, and they really the silent things are the things that they're just so linked with the secret things, right? And so shame's narrative goes like this. It says, if anybody knew this thing, if you said this to anybody, you'll be rejected. And by rejection, that's triggering that belonging part of us, right? That needs to belong. And so it means that you're going to be forsaken, you're going to be kicked out, you're going to be abandoned, you're going to be left to die alone in the cold, right? And all this is happening at the unconscious level. None of us are aware of it most of the time. But shame is really telling us, saying, don't go there, don't share this, don't say this, don't name this, stay secret, stay silent, stay quiet, right? So secrecy, silence, and judgment. Judgment's the third thing. And judgment, it's part of your safety strategy, right? We're trying to say this is okay and this is not okay. But when we're judging ourselves, right? When we're saying, I can't share this because I won't be accepted, parts of you are always going to be alone, right? That part that can't say that thing, or that can't accept that thing about you, right? You stay in solitude about that thing. And we often have shame about the parts of us that we are yet to accept, and that by default our culture is not accepting of. Right? So those are the conditions in which shame really thrives. And of course, it's kryptonite, the thing that helps it to dissipate and leave our lives is honesty, transparency, vulnerability, right? Kind of the opposite of secrecy, silence, and shame, judgment. And so this idea about being more transparent, being more vulnerable about the things that, like, shame saying, don't share that. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to share that because I know that that is the way through this dilemma, right? That is the way through this block. When you are stepping into that kind of relationship with your shame, what you're doing is you're stepping into your agency, right? It's this obviously intrinsically linked part with your dignity, with yourself, with your selfhood, your sovereignty, right? Where you have the capacity to act on your own behalf. You're powerful. You're stepping into your power. You're not saying, oh, there's parts of me that aren't fit to be known. You're saying, I can learn to accept all of these parts of me, right? All of me gets to be here. And so that is when we're stepping into our agency, which is that confronting shame, right? Confronting shame. Nothing can be weaponized against you if you accept it. This is an important idea, right? So if there is something, if you have a secret or something that you're silent about, and you're afraid that if you share that, it can be weaponized against you, right? It's actually the opposite. Because if you're sharing it, if you're accepting that part that that's true, and you share that, it's like, so what? So you know that about me. There's this great moment in, I don't know if you've watched Orange is the New Black, where Big Boo is fighting, I think, with Doggett, and they're fighting, and Doggett's like, well, you know what? You're fat. And Big Boo is like, you got me. Right? So this thing that's supposed to be shameful, right, being fat, is if you just accept that and you own that, it can't be weaponized in that same way. So this is part of the value of really working with your shame like this, right? So shame, it really gets in the way of you feeling sexually brave, feeling erotically confident, right? Because I told you it was invisible, and it is, and so it's this invisible curtain, or this invisible pressure that diminishes your capacity for your full expression of your sexuality, and you don't even know it, right? Especially if it got put on you at a young age. And shame is put on us, right? It's not something we're born with. It is put on us, and then it becomes a self-perpetuating strategy, trying to stay in control, trying to stay safe, right? Trying to make it our fault so we're not powerless. But it does have these impacts, these consequences, right, of really diminishing your sexuality. So, for example, if you have shame around some desire that you have, right, you're not going to be able to explore that part of your sexuality because it's going to prohibit you from accessing it. Yeah. And this is a big deal, right? It's a big deal to have invisible things that you can't even see and you don't even have in your conscious perception blocking you from a really blossoming, alive experience of sensuality. Right. This is especially true for folks who have sexual trauma, who are marginalized in any way, any oppressed experience of having an othered body, people with disabilities, fat people, people of color, elders, anyone who is not fitting that cultural standard beauty paradigm is extra impacted here. And again, often invisibly. And sometimes we can know it intellectually. I can say, oh yeah, I know that I have shame put on me about being fat, and I can see that, but I don't understand how is that actually limiting my sexual expression, right? And I honestly, we talk about this beauty norm, this the pinnacle of social capital, right? Of folks who have all this going on for them. Honestly, I haven't ever met anyone who doesn't have shame. It's just an ubiquitous part of our experience, and it's not talked about, right? Because we have shame about our shame, and we don't want to talk about it in silence. It breeds in silence. So, all that. So here's one test that will help you start to uncover some shame. And this is a good thing. We want to uncover shame, right? We want to start to be able to perceive it, to know it, so that we can work on it. And there's definitely things that you can do. And I'm sure that there are some areas of your life that you're like, oh yeah, I know I have shame there. And there's others that you might not, right? So here you go. I'm going to ask you to type something in the chat. If I only blank, I'd be good. So mine might be like, if I was only thin, I'd be good. You know, whatever it is for you. And I don't actually believe that about myself, but put it in the chat. If I only blank, and you can just write the blank, I'd be good. If I only was gorgeous, I'd be good. If I could only speak more articulately about my experience, I'd be good. What else? Yes, exactly. If I was only tall and a boy, I'd be good. If I was only in shape, I'd be good. If I could only communicate better, I'd be good. Yeah, here it is, right? If I was only less sensitive, I'd be good. If I was only not so scared. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing like that so honestly. Because like then you can start to see, oh yeah, like I have shame around my sensitivity, or I have shame around my fear, or I have shame around my communication skills. Okay, so that's hard to look at, right? It's hard to acknowledge that's true. We wish it wasn't true. And when you can start to name it like this, and when you can start to identify it, then you can start to interrupt it and work on it. Right? And so this might be a great exercise, this little fill in the blank thing. It's very simple, but it might help you look at where is shame thriving in your sexuality? Where is it limiting you invisibly in your sexuality? So one of the, what shame does is it feels so bad, right? It just feels so unpleasant that it's like almost like an electric fence. This is my favorite image of shame. It's like, so if you've ever touched an electric fence, if you had family who had cows or whatever, you've touched an electric fence, and you're like, oh, there's the electric fence, right? And then you're going to be really careful about going near that electric fence again. And animals learn this, humans learn it, right? We get very attuned to where that boundary is because it's so yucky. And so shame works like this. And so if you touch your shame and then you feel that, whatever that is for you, that sinking, smoky, hazy, blurry, humiliation, mortification, right? All of those feelings, whatever they are, that shame creates in your body. Once you experience those sensations, you're like, oh, I'm not going to go near that again, right? And so most of us veer widely away from what we perceive to be the source of those sensations. We're like, oh, the electric fence is real here, right? And we're going to stay far away from that, right? If you've ever gotten caught masturbating, I wish we were in person because I would be like, raise your hand if you've ever got caught masturbating, right? I have. Like it's like that, right? Of like, oh gosh, I don't want that to happen again. So I'm going to lock the door, do this in the shower, like be really private about it, right? So there is that can happen, right? And then we say our lives get smaller and smaller, our desires get smaller and smaller, our expression gets smaller and smaller because we're staying away from that set of sensations, right? It's just a set of sensations. It's a shitty set of sensations, but it's just a set of sensations. In terms of sex, something really kind of wonderful, but also terrible can happen, which is that that set of sensations that's created with shame can get woven with arousal, right? So like if you are masturbating and someone walks in and, you know, those two sensations, things that nerves, you've heard this, I'm sure, nerves that fire together, wire together, and those can get wired together. And that we maybe need to feel shame in order to feel arousal, or every time we feel arousal, we feel shame. It's a duo that is can become very neurologically hard to unravel. But the basic strategy here is the same, and just to bring it back to that powerlessness. If I can be turned on by something that I have no control over, getting interrupted, I therefore retain power, right? I'm not powerlessness. If I can blame myself for this, if I can take control and responsibility for this, then I am still in my power, right? So it's this brilliant thing that our bodies do, where we wire these things together, we flip this thing that shouldn't be okay into something that becomes like a turn on that we then have more shame about, right? So this is just one way it works with sex, and not for everyone, obviously. Shame and confidence exist on a spectrum, right? You can't, like, being erotically confident really means that you're working on your shame, that you're not invested in kind of protecting that secrecy, protecting that silence. You're invested in becoming more transparent, not being complicit with that anymore, right? And so there's these spectrums of shame to confidence, and they exist in many different points in our sexuality, right? So your body image, like how sexy you feel, right? On a spectrum of shame to confidence. How embodied you are, right? Shame to confidence. How comfortable you are with nudity. How accepting you are of your desires, your fantasies, and your kinks. Masturbation, flirting skills, initiating sex skills, talking about sex, right? These are all spectrums that you can pinpoint your experience on in terms of shame to confidence, your touch skills, your sexual performance skills, negotiating consent. These are all those spectrumy things, and it can be different for everyone. Like I might feel great about being nude in public. I do, actually, very confident on that, right? But for me, like maybe the initiating, I have more shame about, right? And so there's like a map that exists inside of you that is spectrums of all of these different aspects of your sexuality. So it's not monolithic, good news, right? And you can start to tease it apart and be like, when you ask yourself that question, if only I felt comfortable being nude in public, I'd be good, right? If that's my answer, then I can be like, okay, cool, that's the thing I need to develop confidence on, right? So it's not like if you have shame, you're just doomed, right? You get to still develop confidence and develop sexual courage. It's okay. So I want to talk about some tools to identify shame when it's happening. We talked about the fill in the blank. Another one to look for is if other people get to have something that you don't. If you feel maybe low-key envy, or if it's just something that you don't get to have for some reason. Like other people get to be kinky, but not me. Other people get to flirt, but not me. other people get to whatever, yada, 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 not me, not you, right? That's shame, right? There's an impact of shame in that. So if that comes up, if you're like, oh man, so-and-so gets to have that. I wish I got to have that. I don't get to have that. You know, it's not a given. It's just the impact of shame. And so that's another way you can start to track for that invisible force acting in your life. You know, I'm sure you know that set of sensations. We talked about it a little bit, like wanting to crawl under a rock, wanting to hide, wanting to disappear, blushing. All of that indicates shame is present, right? The thing that's really tricky about it is that when you start to look right at it, it's like, where'd you go? You know, like it just kind of, you're like, okay, I'm going to focus on my body shame. And then you're like, where'd it go? Where's my body shame? I'm trying to like, come on, I want to work on this, right? And so to just be gentle about that. And the other thing here to notice, right, of like where you can identify it is when you feel bad about any aspect of your sexuality, right? If you feel bad about it, there's a pretty big probability that that shame is a factor in that. And the thing here with, I'm guessing that most of us here identify as some kind of sex positive, right? We think that sex is vital and essential and a good thing, right, for life. And this can really show up in sex positive spaces because we think, okay, wow, I want that. I want to be cool with that, right? Like so-and-so is having that kink, right? And I just want to be cool with that. But like, I'm actually, whoo, it squicks me, it makes me feel uncomfortable. And so then we start to have shame that we have shame, right? We're like, oh, I must not be a good sex positive person. I must be like secretly sex negative because I can't feel like that's sexy. I feel like squeaky about that, right? So that's another way to notice, right? If you're having shame about your shame, that's definitely just a way to identify, to see it, right? So let's talk about what to do about this. So I'm going to give you 3 shame busting practices. And they're all framed with this idea of you can make a commitment to yourself. You could do it right now if you want. How do you want to be with yourself when you notice the shame, right? Because this is all in that context of like, I want to be erotically confident. I want you to be erotically confident. So we have to deal with the shame, right? Making a commitment about how you want to be with yourself, right? And doing it ahead of time, not when you're in the heat of the humiliated moment, right? This concept, and I invite you to agree with this concept, that shame just points out where you need love and healing and compassion. That's all, you know, it doesn't have to be a huge deal, right? You can just be like, oh yeah, there's some shame, right? But to have this commitment that you're sweet with yourself. Gosh, the world, you know, it's like the world is harsh enough. And one really serious, radical self-love, stake in the ground moment is to say, you know what? When I notice that I am in shame, I'm going to be kind to myself. I'm going to be friendly to myself. And so the first practice is that smiling at shame. So when you feel shame or you notice shame, the presence of shame, even if you're just guessing that it's there, you can interrupt it by just smiling at it. And what that means is you're stepping out of participating in shaming yourself and reinforcing it. And you're stepping into sweetness and kindness, this unconditional friendliness, right? So this practice takes a lot of practice. You're probably not going to be able to do it right away. I work on it all the time, but here's where you start. So you notice shame, like something comes up and you're like, ugh, or you feel that sinking feeling, or you see something that squicks you, or whatever, however you notice it, right? And then you just say, hi, shame. And then you just turn up the corners of your mouth. Like that, okay? So this is it might be called like moving from shame into ruefulness, right? It's a kind of like harm reduction. It's a first step to accepting the isness of the situation. So you learn to smile at shame. You learn to say, I see you. I cultivate unconditional friendliness with myself, with all my parts, including you, shame. Right? You're accepting yourself just as you are. You're not saying, shame, get the fuck out of here. You're just saying, So let's just try it now. So just noticing any shame that's present. When we talk about shame, there's often shame present. And just turning up the corners of your mouth. Hi, shame. Yeah. So that's it. That's the practice. What'd you notice? Put it in the chat. What happens when you just say hi to shame? Turn up the corners of your mouth. It's really hard. Tears, yes. Softening, yes. Many tears. Feels good to allow it instead of fight. Yeah. Can I sustain this? So some fear comes up, right? That's great. I love that. Thank you for honesty around that. Yeah, I think that's just such a base fear of like, am I going to be able to stay with my practices? So let me just give you something for that. If you fall off your practice, guess what? You can just do it the next time. It's okay, right? Like we're not going to have shame about I failed the shame practice. No, we're not going to have shame about that. We're just going to say, oh, okay, more shame. Turn up the corners of my mouth again, right? Like it's just, we're so, oh, it's such a tender experience being human. Right? All right, so the second practice, obviously just keep it smiling at shame. Just turn up the corners of your mouth. And as I said, if you are a person trending towards sex positivity and you start to feel shame about some aspect of your sexuality or some other sexuality, and then you have the shame about the shame, right? And then you're like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be liberated here. I'm a bad sex positive person. Okay, so isn't that funny? Isn't it kind of funny that we do that? Can you just widen your lens for a moment and just appreciate the humor of that, right? And also just like respect to the power of shame. It's tenacious, it's tricksy. And it notices us turning up the corners of our mouths, right? And it's like, oh yeah, want to fight? So you're trying to be shameless, huh? Okay, well, I know what I'm going to do now. And so the thing here is to move out of a confrontational relationship with your shame. So your shame, like when you start to work on it this way, it is going to throw temper tantrums, right? Tricksy temper tantrums, and it's like a toddler. And what is it if you respond with love and mirth, and you have just that widened lens of like, oh, here I am having shame about my shame. Ugh, right? And you're just gentle with yourself, and it's just kind of humorous, and it's not, you just, like, as you feel yourself getting sucked down the shame hole, you're like, girl, it's all right. We're just going to go have a snack, it's okay, right? So just widening your lens, noticing the humor when this happens. And the third strategy that I want to share with you is the tell a friend strategy. So remember that part about how shame needs secrecy and silence to thrive? So the tell a friend strategy is a shame buster of epic proportions, right? So, I mean, that's just what it is. You just tell a friend. You're like, oh, God, I had so much shame come up around. I saw this movie and it had this sex scene in it. And I felt so much shame around it. Or I flirted with this person and they didn't respond and I just had so much shame. Like all you do is name it, right? It's probably going to feel really hard when you're doing it. And maybe that's 90 seconds if you're like, God, I wanted to pop that guy in the nose. Or maybe you're like, God, I did pop that guy in the nose. Now I feel really ashamed, right? It's hard to say it out loud because you are breaking internal taboo. But in telling a compassionate friend, and then surviving the backlash of speaking truth through shame, right? The benefits that you get from that, the acceptance and the compassion and the like, oh, sweetheartness that your friend is going to offer you, like, oh, you're so human. Of course you did that, right? The benefits that you get from surviving those few minutes of feeling shitty last the rest of your life. This is a big shame buster, right? Because you're like, oh my God, I haven't ever told anybody this thing. And then you start saying it. And then you maybe even want to start saying it to everybody, right? It just becomes accepted. And the shame cannot exist in that environment, right? Because its narrative is of not belonging. You don't belong because of this thing. And when you tell someone and they reinforce belonging for you, right? It magically dissipates it, right? And in that situation, when you tell a friend, when you use that strategy, you have treated shame at its source because you have accepted belonging, you have allowed yourself to belong, and you have broken that narrative of you don't get to belong because of this, right? So I've been talking a lot about shame, and now we're going to talk about more about erotic confidence. And this is the prize that you get when you move through shame, right? Is erotic confidence. And this is your sexual agency. It's your power embodied. You know it when you have it. You feel assured. You feel like you know what you want. You can communicate that. You can initiate all sorts of shenanigans, right? You feel good about your body, good about your touch skills, good about your sexual performance, your level of presence. Flirting is fun. Whoa, it's fun. It's not work. It's about sex becomes about consent and pleasure and connection instead of about neuroses and anxiety. And when I ask people, hey, what do you find sexy? Almost always people say confidence. That's what I find sexy. Nobody's like, oh, I just love a tightly, whatever, treated pecs or abs or ass. Like nobody says that. You know, nobody says that's what I find sexy. Everybody says I find confidence sexy, right? And so it's not about how you look. Erotic confidence is about filling yourself with a grounded, authentic knowing about the goodness of your lust, right? So it's not about how you look. It's not about how much sexual capital you have, right? It's not about if I only had this, then I'd be good. It's about how you feel and how you feel on the inside of your experience. How you are with yourself, how much erotic resilience you have that supports you taking erotic risks, how much shame you've exited from your life. The thing is, the thinking and the practices, like what got you to here won't get you to there, right? You're going to have to practice differently. You're going to have to think differently. You're going to have to come up with some new narratives. And practice is what sets you up for success, right? And when you have success, when you have an erotic success, you flirt with somebody and they're like, cool, you know, and they float back with you, right? That's an erotic success. And when you have that and you build on that, right, again and again and again, that becomes like a foundational erotic confidence that no one can ever take away from you. It's not about how you're perceived coming, like what is coming toward you. It's about what you're feeling here, what you're feeling, and nobody can take that, right? And it really, it matters. It matters so much. You know, I think that it's like a lot of times we think about erotic confidence as maybe like an extra bonus. I don't think it is. I think it's really about getting to the heart of the matter, getting to live your life with the optimal joy and potency and vitality. Yeah. This is like the good stuff. This is the good stuff. And we can be all in our neuroses for the rest of our life, but like, ugh, that sucks. So I'm gonna tell you a story about my friend Colleen. And it's a sad story, but it's also a beautiful story. So my friend Colleen died in 2019, and I had a chance to interview her for my podcast 8 days before she died. And she was dying of cancer. She knew she didn't have long, right? We didn't know exactly when she was going to die. But one of the things that we talked about, and this is, if you want to go to Bespoken Bones, you'll find her interview, Colleen Cook. We spoke about her relationship with her sexuality. And she told me that she was completely unafraid to die. But what she was scared of was that she hadn't lived, that she hadn't embraced her sexuality fully. And how her fear of intimacy, how her shame kept her from being fully expressed, and how she longed to go to her death, knowing herself as a sexual being, right? That's how important this is. This person is dying and they're thinking about sex. And it's so beautiful to me. It's not frosting. This is the core of it, in my opinion. It's about you getting to be fully you, loving all the parts of you. And I think so many of us think, oh, that's just too hard. I don't want to deal with my shame. It's really sucky. Maybe I'll get to that someday. But what I learned from Colleen is like, now is the time to do this, right? Don't wait. And we had a really tender flirtation as she was dying, and it was so sweet. And it's, this practice of erotic confidence, it's something that I work on every day. I expect to work on it every day until I die, right? Because like you, my experience is of having to really fight hard for sex, to love my body, to find myself worthy of love, to find myself worthy of desire and being desired, to find myself sexy, believe that my desires are welcomed by others. I fight hard for that. And I'm just guessing that this is probably familiar. Yeah. Would you just drop a yes in the chat if this is familiar? That would be super nice to see all those yeses. Oh my God, yes. Oh, hell yes. That's so good, y'all. Thank you. I feel affirmed, right? It's so hard. So much. Fuck yes, yes, yes. Okay, great. Heard all those yeses. I'm like, yeah, we're all here, right? We're all struggling. And we all think we're probably like the only one, right? It's so annoying. Anyway, so I'm going to be taking all your questions in just a minute because I know you probably have a lot of questions. And this is a dense and intense topic. But I want to tell you about the new course that we're launching today, which is the Erotic Confidence course. And it's really an offering that was born out of my own desire to have a course like this in the world that I could take, so that I could learn to be sexually confident. And I couldn't find anything. And so I made it, and I'm making it. And the cool thing about creating a course is that you get to go through the process, right? Like right now I'm writing and recording and practicing and doing all the exercises, and like I'm doing the things that I'm going to ask my students to do. And it's great. It's so great to be in that container of like, wow, there's still so much. There's just still so much for this person right here. So we're starting in September, and the course is experiential, which means you're going to be practicing. You're going to be doing stuff to build new skills for confidence and to build more resilience. And really the intention is to help you feel sexually bold and sexually courageous and resilient so that you can take appropriate risks for you. And this way of working is foundational, right? We're building foundations of courage and bravery and shame busters and confidence. We're not teaching performative confidence, right? Because anybody can like put on a swagger, right? And I did this for a long time, just like I'm going to put on my erotic confidence, like I put on my outfit, right? But it always felt kind of on the outside. And this is designed to create something that's on the inside. And so that's what we're up to. Because you came to this webinar, you have early, like the course isn't opening to the general public until July 5th. So you have from now until July 5th, and you can take the course for $400 off. There's a coupon. Let me put it in the thing for you. Don't go away now and do this. Stay here because I want to hear your questions. But there's the registration page and the coupon code so that you can get $400 off. And it is, this is the first time we're offering it. We're never going to offer it at this price again. And I'm not trying to be salesy when I say that. It's just true. It's going to be really potent. So after the webinar, please go and sign up. And if you have other questions, of course, be in touch. You know how to reach me. But yeah, I'd love it if you were in this class. And I think it's going to be a really potent, transformative container that gets you from where you are to where you want to be, because that's the goal, right? Of giving you pragmatic skills to get there. So, cool. Let me hear your questions, and I'm going to give you my full attention. We have about 15 minutes, so you can put them in the chat. And I'd love to take as many as I can, and let's see where we go. Okay, this is a good question. Shame around extremely taboo subjects. It feels impossible to tell a friend. Yeah. Well, could be a therapist. Like, I think the thing is, who in your life is non-judgmental enough? Who do you trust to say this thing? And if there's no one, what would it be like to write a letter and put it in the mailbox? What would it be like to ask a friend if for this initial sharing? It could be a silent share, so you're just like together and you're sharing it with them without words. Are there ways to presence this that if it feels if it's just like, yeah, that's way beyond my threshold, I think you could also build up to it. Like start small, sharing some smaller stuff that's terrible that you're ashamed of, and build up to a big share. I will tell you that I shared the thing with my best friend a number of years ago that I had never told anyone, that I was the absolute most ashamed of in my entire life. And I thought, there's a bunch of stuff, and I had shared a bunch of stuff and had a lot of therapy. And then there was just this one thing that I couldn't talk about. And I ended up sharing it with him. And the way he responded was like, oh, Pavini, we all have that, and it changed everything for me. And so it's like, I think maybe you could also frame it for a friend of like, hey, this is a really intense thing. I really need you to respond in this way, to be just like quiet or just nodding, or can I pass you this note? Like, how can you do it in a way that that lowers the intensity enough so that you do it? Because like the value of it is going to be so transformative. But it does need to be, you need to know that the person is going to be, compassionate and caring with it. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. Okay, next question. Do you have to accept what gender you are to have erotic confidence? This is interesting. It's my sense that accepting all of who we are builds a lot of confidence, right? It's like nothing can be weaponized if you've accepted it. And, our genders change and are fluid sometimes, and sometimes they're not. And I mean, I think that there's never a place that you get to where you're like, cool, I'm done accepting all the parts of myself, right? Because there's always new parts. And this like accepting of gender and gender identity is a process. And I think that there are elements of erotic confidence that support that process, right? Of like, no matter what your gender is right now or what your gender is changing or might be, that there is a way to welcome that with, and maybe it's something like saying, I accept my gender right where it is right now, you know, and it's not, it doesn't mean that it's done. It doesn't mean it's cooked. It means that it's still in process. So that might be one way to work with that. And this is such a common question for trans people, right? Like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do X, Y, Z in my transition, or I'm going to go on hormones, or I'm going to have surgery, or I'm going to see a voice coach, or da da da. Then I will be able to be my whatever. What does this sound like? If I only was blank, then I'd be good, right? And how do we start accepting ourselves right where we are, knowing that we are still in process, knowing that will always be in process, right? But how can we be in acceptance of who we are right now? So that's what I would say about that. I like that question a lot. Thank you. All right, what other questions do you have? We have time, y'all. You have my full attention. Hit me. Thanks. How do you deal with the overwhelm of having an extreme amount of things to feel shame about? Yeah. I wonder, I mean, it's kind of two different questions. How do you deal with the overwhelm? It's like, how do you deal with overwhelm in your life in general? You slow down, right? You take breaks, you create rest. And I think that that would be where I would begin, is knowing that working through shame is a lifelong process, right? And sometimes it's like you yank out one weed and another one grows back, right? You have to be on it. And what is it to do it in a way that's just like, okay, I brush my teeth every day. That's part of my dental hygiene, and I sit with myself every day. I meditate every day, and that's part of my shame hygiene, you know, or I offer myself acceptance, and that's part of that. Like, how would it be to slow it down and spread it out so that it's not like, oh shit, I have to do this all right now, or I'm not ever going to be erotically confident, right? Like, no. It's, remember, these things exist on a spectrum, right? And that you, I mean, I think it's always a good practice to see what's alive right now, what's moving for you right now, you know, like what's up, and to work on it there, you know, to bring acceptance, to bring care, to bring love, compassion, telling a friend, talking about it, breaking silence, all of that to whatever is in front of you, right? Like, this is the intention of this webinar, is not to be like, okay, y'all, now make your shame bucket list and you're just going to get through that. Like, no, it's not like that, right? It's just like, when it's present, when it comes up, address it. Don't be afraid of it. It's not a scary monster. It's something that you can work with in your life over time. So I think, like, slowing down and just having that widened perspective could be really, really helpful here. Yeah, big things like sexual violence and incest. Yeah, it takes the time it takes, right? We can't really rush our process. We would like to. We would like to be like, okay, I'm done. And it is not, you know, it is not like that, right? And so, can you trust that your body will metabolize as it does, right? I think that the important thing here is that you're turning your attention towards it. Because we talked about shame, how it hides in the corners, right? It's like, I'm not here. You don't see me. This is not the shame you're looking for, right? And so when you start to turn towards it, to be like, oh, I'm going to work with this really compassionately, I think it shifts. It's been my experience, at least. Yeah, thanks for that question. Okay. Would you be able to speak to how talking about a shameful experience impacts the perpetrator? I know it in my head, but cannot seem to bring it in. Reported ongoing sexual harassment, how that impacts coworkers. Yeah, so when trauma is present, when sexual trauma is present, shame will be present. Right, and that, and this is why victim blaming happens, right? It's like why victims will blame themselves, and it's why other people will blame victims, to try and stay out of powerlessness of this thing happened. This happened. And so the person who breaks silence, if you are the recipient of sexual violence or sexual harassment, and you break silence about it, right? Like, you are making everybody talk about the thing that they would rather not talk about, and you would rather not talk about. And so it's, I mean, it just sucks because there's such a, there can be such a backlash, right? And how it impacts the perpetrator. Yeah. Shame is used as a tool of control of belonging, right? And so when people fuck up, like if, and I don't know if the perpetration was intentional or not, and it's slightly different. But when, if it's just an honest mistake, if somebody did something that is sexually harassing, but they weren't like, you know what I mean? Like they weren't trying to, but they weren't maybe trying not to. You know, the shame that will be created for them lies in how, I think, how willing they are to stay with what happened without collapse, right? So if they can look at that and they can say, I did that, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, tell me about the impact, right? Then I'm guessing that that person, like, they might feel remorse, they might feel sorrowful that that happened, but not necessarily crippling shame, right? And it's, I think it's only when people they can't admit, like I did that, you know, the shame has that quality of being really toxic. And that is, all of that said, none of that is your responsibility, right? Like, you don't need to worry actually about you talking about your experience and how that impacts the perpetrator, because that's theirs and they can get their own support with that. And I mean, I think what's important is for you to be true to your own healing process and what matters for you. And this speaking out, this naming of things like sexual harassment is so courageous. It's so, so, so courageous. And I just am really wishing for you so much kindness and support and compassion and love all around you as you're in this process. Yeah. All right, folks, I see that there's a couple of more questions, and we're at the end of our time together. I just want to, again, like, here, take a breath and acknowledging the bravery of this for you, for just showing up for this. It's great. It's rad. And hope to see you in the Erotic Confidence course. It would be really great to work with you. Y'all are bringing really great questions. And so, yeah, I am Dr. Pavini Moray for Wilcilium, and I'm just wishing you a shame-free, very confident sex life. See you next time.